Perfect. Thank you, everyone. As I mentioned, my name is Michelle Mai with Orange County United Way. It is a pleasure to introduce our presenter, Jerry Muir. Jerry's an accomplished college instructor specializing in taxation, accounting, business, and personal finance. He currently teaches at Norco College, Coastline College, and Chaffey College, where he designed and taught California Tax Education Council qualifying education courses and developed innovation online and hybrid learning experiences using Canvas and Zoom. Prior to his academic career, Jerry served 27 years with the Internal Revenue Service in progressively responsible positions, including tax auditor, revenue agent reviewer, senior stakeholder relationship tax consultant, and acting territory manager. His work included teaching income tax courses to IRS employees, volunteer tax preparers, and international audiences across Europe, Asia, and the US. He's also contributed to revisions of the Internal Revenue Manual, the IRS publication 4012. A retired U.S. Army National Guard officer, Jerry had multiple leadership assignments, including battalion commander in Kosovo and vice chief of staff for the California Army National Guard. His military education includes completion of the U.S. Army War College, Command and General Staff College, and Inspector General course. Jerry is an enrolled agent and self-employed tax practitioner, preparing individual and business returns and representing clients before the IRS and the U.S. Tax Court. He also serves as vice president of the South Orange County chapter of the California Society of Tax Consultants and has coordinated multiple tax forums. Passionate about teaching and community service, Jerry volunteers extensively with the IRS VITA program and local organizations, training new tax preparers and supporting free tax assistance initiatives throughout Southern California. And now I'm going to pass it along to Jerry to get us started.
Okay, thank you, Michelle. Appreciate that intro. And the focus on the screen there, that's Herbie Husker. That's one of our mascots at the University of Nebraska at Lincoln. They're not playing today, so I can be here all day on this Zoom. Next slide, please. Okay, our objectives today, we will introduce you to the VITA program. If you're new to the VITA program, this is really what this presentation is all about. If you're a returning VITA volunteer, you will get something out of this, absolutely, but this is primarily geared for new volunteers. We will talk about tax year 2025, and anytime you hear me say 2025 or season 2025 or 2026, you have to differentiate between the tax year and the season. Right now, we're in tax year 2025, and we're actually going to be in tax season 2026 when we open up our VITA site. We'll talk about the ethics of VITA. We'll talk about screening and interviewing, which is very important. And then taxpayer management. That's really something that your site coordinator is primarily going to be focused on. And then we will talk about Link and Learn. That is the IRS program to certify, i.e. to take your test so you can become a volunteer. And then we'll talk about what is called the IRS Practice Lab, which uses a TaxSlayer Pro tax preparation software platform. And then we'll give you a quick intro into that legislation that passed back in July called the One Big Beautiful Bill. Talk about some of the topics there. And then we'll get into some of the nitty gritty with filing basics and filing statuses. We'll talk about the Affordable Care Act, i.e. Covered California. And then we'll talk about reporting income, some other topics to include ITINs. ITINs are the individual taxpayer identification number. And then toward the end, which I think we'll have time, we'll do a real basic exercise. Next slide. And so we'll go to noon. We'll take a break at approximately on the hour. Okay, so what is VITA? When you think of VITA, that's the Volunteer Income Tax Assistance Program. It's been around for well over 50 years. If I recall from my reading, It goes all the way back to about 1970. I think the legislation passed in 1969. So it's been around a long time. And as it says on the screen, it has a mission of providing free and basic tax preparation to qualified individuals. And so what that means is sometimes when you're at your VITA site, you'll have someone who will be there and they want help. And we will tell them that based on their situation, that they're out of scope. And we'll talk about how to deal with out of scope taxpayers. And then as far as your qualification, this is the general rule, and there's a little wiggle room. And it says on the screen, if you make about $67,000 or less. And so, for example, last year, I think we had people come in with a real basic return. They had W-2 income, which meant they're an employee, perhaps maybe $70,000. Well, that's okay for the wiggle room. So again, generally. But that's what we see. Now, of course, when you talk about net worth is obviously you take all of your assets, you subtract your liabilities, and the difference is net worth. And you can have a net worth of hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars and still qualify for VITA because based on income levels. And then, of course, the focus in VITA, and you'll see this when you volunteer, it's focused on low income, moderate income, limited English speaking, and individuals with disabilities. And of course, veterans too. All right. And then when you talk about VITA, the IRS, of course, they administer the program. And then you've got tens of thousands of volunteers throughout the United States. And what they do is they certify, they work at a community center or at a church, something like that. And then there's a site coordinator. And when you hear the term site coordinator, think of like an operations manager. That's the guy or gal who's in charge of the site. Of course, they also have folks who work for them. They have an assistant site coordinator. They'll have individuals who do the e-filing, and you'll see all of that. And we'll talk about that during the next total of 5 sessions that we have. And the one thing about the VITA services, everybody who works as a tax preparer is going to be certified. And we'll go through the certification process in detail. If you're not a person who wants to do taxes, you want to help out at the site, there's a title called greeter, and as a greeter, you only have to certify on what is called the ethics certification. All right, and here's another thing about VITA. You're going to see this. Every return is going to be reviewed, and so I operate a VITA site at a college, and when I prepare a return, and I'm the instructor, someone reviews that return for me. Every return is going to be reviewed, and that helps out. That reduces the error rate, if you will. Next slide. Okay, and so I'm going to go ahead and do a quick intro. This is, I guess you'd call this the cast of characters. And there's a lot of people at St. Killian's and United Way who work in the program. And so I will do this. I will just mention if anybody's on the call who wants to jump on a microphone and introduce themselves, these are the folks. And I want to point out a couple people. Fred Ramos, I think he's been doing it about the longest. And then we've got Christine Gallardo. She may not be on the call this morning. She is our IRS representative, if you will. And then Michelle she is with the Orange County United Way. She's on the call. And then we've got Mel. He's going to be the site coordinator. And then I think we've got Robert on the call. He'll be the assistant site coordinator. And then we got some other players that you see on the screen here. And then at the bottom, that's me, Jerry Muir, and I'm the guy who's going to do the training for the next 5 weeks. Does anybody want to come off mute and introduce themselves?
Hey Jerry, good morning. This is Steven Loreto. Just well, wanted to welcome everybody, and I'm glad that we're capturing a lot of audience on this training. So we're happy about that, and we're just gonna be silent participants here at St. Killian. We're here in the background, so if there's any specific question, then we're here. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Steve. And Steve is our IT site coordinator, and he's assisted by a number of folks. All right, then here we go. Okay, so when we talk about certification, we're going to introduce you. this morning to what is called the IRS Link and Learn program. And that particular program, IRS has it. And what you do is you go on the website and you will actually certify when the certifications have been posted to the website. And then also the program has a lot of tutorials. It has a lot of background information, if you will. And then it also has the software, the practice software. And when you're talking about the practice software, that's called the practice lab. The practice lab is exactly that. You will use it to practice. When you certify or take your test to be a volunteer, you use the practice lab again to practice and to prepare returns, and then that way you're ready to go. And right now, the practice lab for tax year 2025 has not been posted. And no harm, no foul. We're going to use 2024. You'll get the experience. You'll navigate through the software. You get familiar with it. And then there's a password to actually use the software, which again, we're going to introduce you to, and it's Train Pro Web. That's all one word, all uppercase. And then at the very bottom of the screen, it talks about the publication 4012. And as a VITA volunteer, there are many, many different publications that you will and can use. But really, your go-to document for the VITA program, and this is for federal and federal only, is the publication 4012. And that's the resource guide. And this resource guide for tax year 2025, it has been published. Every year, it is updated by IRS employees and also some volunteers. And then it's published out on the street. And this is a go-to document. And I use this all the time when I'm doing VITA work. And every once in a while, when I'm in my office, that's what I do for a living. I teach, and I'm a tax guy. Every once in a while, I'll open that up at my office to review certain topics. But again, that's your go-to document, and we'll talk about that throughout the training sessions. Okay, this is kind of a little bit of an eye chart, but if you're brand new to VITA, this is going to be important to you. And if you're coming back as a volunteer, again, this is also important. So we adhere to what are called volunteer standards of conduct, and then we also have site requirements. And so we'll just go through these real quick so you have an understanding what this program is as far as ethics. And so what we do at each site, we follow the quality site requirements. And then number two, we don't accept any payment. A lot of times people want to pay for this service. This is a free service. And so what that means is taxpayers do not pay anything. Now, will a taxpayer bring in a box of cookies? I guess they can, and sometimes they do, but we don't accept money payments for work that we do. This is a free service that is offered up to taxpayers, eligible taxpayers. And then also what we do in the VITA program, we prepare a federal return, and generally we're going to prepare a California return. So we don't prepare returns from New Mexico or Idaho or Arizona, nothing like that. And it's a basic individual tax return, which is a Form 1040. And then for California, it's the 540. And then here's another thing. We don't solicit business. And so if you're an insurance agent, an insurance broker, an attorney, an enrolled agent, something like that, you don't solicit business. I've been asked for my business card many, many times at VITA sites, and I tell people that I don't solicit business, but we tell them where they can go if they need some type of help from professionals. We'll discuss that. The next one is we don't prepare false returns. And this is something you're going to see in the VITA site. It doesn't matter if you're an attorney, an enrolled agent, a personal finance guru, it doesn't matter. You're going to make a mistake. I've made truckloads of mistakes in tax returns. And so the idea is we don't intentionally prepare a false return. When we make mistakes, mistakes can be fixed, but we don't go out of our way. That's something you don't want to do. And usually that is not the case. Well over 99.99% of volunteers are trying to do the right thing. And then the volunteer standards of conduct number 5, and I'll just read this aloud. It says you don't engage in criminal, infamous, dishonest, notoriously disgraceful conduct. So in other words, you do the right thing. And so that's usually not an issue, but I think we've had a couple a couple incidents over the many, many years that VITA's been there where individuals went out of their way to do something wrong and they were pushed out of the program. And then the last one, you treat people professionally, courteously, and respectfully. And what it is you're going to see all types of people that come to the site. The vast majority of them are appreciative of the service. Then what we do is we treat them again professionally and with respect. And sometimes that means you have to listen to their story. And then when they're done telling the story, you got to say, well, because you do not qualify for the service, and this is why you don't qualify, you're going to have to go somewhere else. And that's what we do. Sometimes we do turn people away, but we give them a PAP because at the end of the day, they do want a tax return completed. The quality site requirements, this is something that we also adhere to. Certification, that there's different levels. We're going to talk about that, but everybody at the site is certified at some level. So let's say you're the greeter. You greet people, say hello, they sign in, and that's all you do. You're still going to be certified at what is called the Volunteer Standards of Conduct level, which is a very basic test. Now, if you're a quality reviewer and you're reviewing tax returns, you're going to be most likely certified at the advanced level. But there's different levels and everybody gets certified. And the great thing about the certification, once it comes online, it's all done electronically. It is self-paced, excuse me, and you you can come back the next day. I remember one time I was doing certification and I heard a little bird outside in my house and I watched the bird for a while and I got lost in thought and I came back about an hour later and completed my certification. But everybody's certified. We'll talk about the intake and interview in a sheet. And if you're an accountant or a bookkeeper, you're familiar with the term a lead sheet. And that's exactly what the intake and interview sheet is. It's a lead sheet. The taxpayer will complete it. We have an interviewer that helps the taxpayer to essentially perfect it. And we use that intake and interview sheet. We use that for a couple of reasons. One, to prepare a return, and also to do the quality review because all returns are reviewed. And then, of course, we have to confirm identification from taxpayers. And I've never seen an issue where a taxpayer didn't have some type of photo identification, whether it is a driver's license, a state ID card, or a U.S. passport, or some type of consulate card if they're a Mexican national. We see a lot of that at the site that I work at. But we do ask for a photo ID, and we also ask for a social security card. And then reference material, this is something, it's not a high bar because reference materials that we do not have in a paper format, they're all electronic. And that's a good thing about the IRS website. You can download just about any form or document or publication. And the two big ones that you're going to get familiar with will be the publication 4012, which is the Volunteer Resource Guide, and then the publication 17. And then the volunteer agreement, we'll all get familiar with that. That's essentially the contract between you and whatever entity you're volunteering for, whether it's United Way or St. Killian's. And what happens is the Link and Learn program will automatically populate your certification level on that volunteer agreement when you go through certification. And then that agreement is something you share with your site coordinator. As far as timely filing of tax returns, that really falls on the site coordinator and the electronic return originator. That's a person who actually e-files. What we do in the program, we'll prepare returns, and then typically either that day or in the next business day, the returns are electronically filed. The vast majority of the returns in the program are e-filed. And in some cases, for whatever reasons, we cannot e-file the return. We contact the taxpayer. We tell them, hey, they need to mail in the return to the IRS and the Franchise Tax Board. And but again, most of them are prepared and submitted electronically. There's a civil rights poster because we help everybody who's qualified, and you'll see that poster at the VITA site. Your site coordinator is responsible for posting that. And then another thing your site coordinator is responsible for, we have a site identification number for each and every VITA site, and there are thousands of them, many, many thousands of them throughout the United States. And so there's a unique number that's assigned by the IRS to each and every site. And that's something your coordinator will take care of. And then as far as the the EFIN is something else that your site coordinator will take care of. And that EFIN actually appears on each and every return that's prepared. And then another thing that we have in the VITA program is security, privacy, and confidentiality. And that's based on a publication which we'll review in just a few moments. It's called the Publication 4299. And it talks about security as far as passwords, obtaining signatures, and making sure you're not sharing information because tax information is very, very private. It's kind of like medical information. Most people don't want their tax information to be shared with others, so we don't. And there's ways to adhere to that. Again, that's publication 4299. All right, next slide. Okay, so we'll slow down a little bit, and you're going to hear the term scope of service again and again in the VITA program. And it simply means this. It simply means that you've got certain returns that we're going to prepare. There are certain topics that we will not consider in the VITA program. So, for example, we've had people who've requested us to prepare a gift tax return. We are not trained to do a gift tax return that's outside of the scope, and so we don't do that. Sometimes we'll have an individual come in with a rental property, and we can assist them, but there's a big however. We have to have individuals who are trained in preparing a Schedule E, and the taxpayer has to be a military member. So there's all sorts of restrictions, if you will, and that's called the scope of service chart, which is in your publication 4012. So probably the best way to look at this is we focus on basic tax preparation. And then when individuals, and this happens all the time, I'm asked this constantly, Jerry, if you can't help us, who can? I said, well, there's all sorts of options. And one option is you could go to a society in California and they have tax preparers who register. I think there's almost about 1,000 of them. And it's called the California Society of Tax Consultants. And you can go to their website and you can plug in your zip code and you can get a laundry list of preparers in your area. And yes, the individuals who belong to that particular society, they're accountants, there are members of CTEC, which we'll talk about, they're enrolled agents, and sometimes attorneys. And yes, they do charge. But again, we don't recommend a taxpayer go to a specific person. We'll tell them go to that website to select someone that you want help to do your return. And there's other types of preparers. You're going to see that CTEC preparer. That's pretty popular in California. And so if you are a tax person in California and you're charging money to do returns, then if you're not an enrolled agent or a CPA or a licensed attorney, you have to belong to CTEC. And nothing wrong with that. It's just it's an organization that was set up by the California legislature about 25 years ago plus, and there are a lot of people who are CTEC registered. If you're in this program and eventually you want to become a tax preparer, one option is to join CTEC. You have to, of course, go through a process. And then once you become a registered tax preparer, then you can assist people for pay, if you will. But again, in our program, we just say, hey, if we can't help you, here are some options for you. We do not recommend an individual taxpayer, or tax preparer. So for example, when someone say, Jerry, who do you recommend? I don't look at them and say, well, I recommend Jerry Muir. No, I don't recommend myself. I don't recommend my friends. You go to a website, and there are different websites. There's a California Society of Enrolled Agents. You have CPAs, but again, don't recommend an individual tax preparer. And then sometimes you're going to bump into, and I've had this a few times, where individuals have such a very involved situation. They're low income, moderate income, and they can't afford an attorney or a CPA or an enrolled agent. And so there's a low income tax clinic. They're all over the United States. They are supported mostly, I think, in part by U.S. taxpayer dollars. And so that's another option, if you will, for individuals who not only want tax preparation or perhaps they have a tax issue, it could be maybe a collection issues or an examination issue. And low income tax clinics, they can either work for free or at reduced rates. But again, that's another option, if you will. So I always tell people if we can't help them, we give them options. We kind of point the path, if you will, and so that way they can say, okay, there's hope out there. And that's scope of service. Like I say, if we can't help them out, they need to go somewhere else. And we will talk about scope of service throughout this presentation and in the next Saturdays that we do. Next slide. There are many different publications. You're probably only going to get familiar with that publication 4012, but we're going to talk about some of these because sometimes you will refer to them or you'll maybe read them in full. And so that privacy and confidentiality and civil rights, that's a publication 4299. And again, it's all about security and confidentiality. And it talks about all of the various rules. The training guide, the 4491, it's a useful guide. It has a lot of tax fact patterns, and it's used for training. Now, personally, I don't use it, and there's a lot of reasons I don't use it. It's not because it's a bad guide. I just don't use it. I use other things. But it is helpful if you're an instructor or if you want to get some additional training. The 4491 is there. If you're a site coordinator, there is training, and you would do this on that Link and Learn that we talked about. And a site coordinator has to go through it's a short training session, if you will. And I always recommend that each and every site has a site coordinator that's gone through the training and at least one assistant site coordinator. Because at the end of the day, what's going to happen is someone's going to get sick, someone's going to be late, something's going to happen. And if you have an assistant site coordinator or a couple of them, then what happens is they'll go through the training and they will be able to pick up when a site coordinator is not there and they can continue to run the site. And then here's a great service. If you've ever used over the phone interpreters, I have. They're fantastic because in the VITA program in Southern California, you're going to bump into people who speak Spanish, Farsi, Mandarin, Vietnamese, Korean, you name it, Russian. It's all over. And this particular training, it's called the over the phone interpreter training. It's actually a training module. You get certified and that job aid talks about it. And so once you get certified, then what happens is you can call the interpreter services. They'll give you you'll get a code, and you contact them, and then they can help you with interpreting. And of course, these individuals, these interpreters, are trained obviously in interpreting, and also they know various tax terms and topics, if you will. So it's a great service. And if you need it. And also, and maybe Michelle, you can opine on this. I do know that we do have taxpayers over the years that are deaf, and so we also have American Sign Language interpreters. And I think in past years, I think we got them through United Way. But again, there's all sorts of possibilities. I would not turn someone away if they speak a different language. I wouldn't do that. My mom, she was born in a foreign country, and she had a very heavy accent all of her life. So I wouldn't turn her away, and I don't think you want to turn anybody away. So we can help them out, and that's a great service. There's a total of 83 languages that are represented, and so you should be able to get some assistance there. Okay, and then other things when you talk about the fact sheet, this is great for site coordinators, assistant site coordinators, and anybody who's interested in reading about the VITA program. And this fact sheet, which is for fighting season 2026, it's the 5358. And one thing this fact sheet has is all of the various publications and forms that we use in the VITA program. And so that's a very helpful document, the 5358. Another publication, again, geared towards site coordinators, the 5683. And then moving to the next one, this is the Intake, Interview, and Quality Review Handbook. And it's a 53, I stand corrected, it's a 5838. This document is going to help you pass that certification because one certification is called the Intake and Interview. And so that's a helpful document. And then I'll kind of pause here for a moment. I'll tell you about the 6744. This is another go-to document, and I'll tell you how I do business. And it doesn't mean that you're not going to do it the way I'm going to do it, but you might. What I do every year, I have to certify, and so I get my hands on the 6744, and I take the test. And when I take the test, what I do is the questions are in the 6744. I look up and I'll be the first to admit I do know a lot about taxes, but I'm not a genius. And so I look up every single answer in my 4012 and I record those answers in the 6744. And then I have all of my questions and answers. And then when the Link and Learn certification opens up electronically, I open it up, I plug in my answers, I hit submit, and I'm done. But again, the 6744 is a very useful document, and that's the test and the retest. And this is kind of a word to the wise. If you're in the tax world, you'll probably do okay. If you're brand new to the tax world, look up all of the questions that are posed to you on the 6744, or if you just go straight to the link and learn. You want to do that. I've had revenue agents who worked for me as a volunteer, and they try to take the certification and they failed it. And I said, well, the reason you failed it is because you didn't look up the answers. And a lot of them were like what is called large business and international large case agents, and they haven't touched a 1040 in years. So again, the 6744 worth its weight in gold. Another document, and it's revised every year, it's updated every year, is the publication 17. And that's another thing about taxes. If you've taken a tax class, you know that we're talking just federal taxes right now. Every year, federal taxes change. Sometimes they change a little bit, and sometimes they change a lot. And so that people volunteer and they haven't touched taxes in 10 years, and it's a different world for them because 10 years ago was 10 years ago. But the publication 17 is updated every year. And one thing about the Pub 17, it's not perfect. It's pretty good. It's revised by IRS employees. And then once it has been revised, it goes to IRS attorneys. They make sure it's going to comply with the law that's passed. And then it's published. And you don't need it hard copy. I guess you can get a hard copy if you want. I think you got to pay for them. I don't think we have those anymore in the VITA program, but they're all available on the IRS website. And then the instructions for the 1040, that's another very useful document. I've used that not only in my tax practice, but certainly at the VITA site. And then you're going to see the 1040 and the 1040 SR. The SR is for seniors 65 and older. And when you prepare a tax return, you're going to ask certain questions to include their date of birth. And then what happens is the 1040 SR for our seniors is automatically generated. So it's one or the other. And then here's another thing about the, if you can go back to that, Michelle, a lot of times I get questions, hey, Jerry, how is income tax computed? I said, well, that's easy. There's a section in the Internal Revenue Code that has the tax tables, and on the instructions to the Form 1040, there is a income tax table, and that's how you can actually check your work if you think the computer is suspect. And then there's also earned income tax tables. We'll talk about those also, but very helpful. Like I said, the instructions to the 1040, a very helpful document, and it's updated every year. All right. Okay, and then the 1040, you're going to get real familiar with this in the VITA program. And again, our taxpayers that come to the site, typically we prepare a 1040 and then of course a 540. And usually individuals who come to the VITA site, they either have a filing requirement or they want to get a refund. But again, the 1040 and the 540 is a package that we prepare for them. And as I mentioned before, we do not prepare out-of-state returns. We do not prepare non-resident returns for California. We do not prepare part year returns. And it's kind of a tough pill to swallow because sometimes people say, well, gee whiz, what do I do? Well, again, the options include going out in town and finding yourself a preparer who will do that. The 4491X, that's your supplement that comes out, and that's I see that from time to time. I'll review it, and it's helpful when it comes out. Another publication that you're going to be using to actually certify on what is called the ethics test, which is the volunteer standards of conduct. That's the publication 4961. Now, one thing about that ethics test, you can actually read the executive summary in the 4961, and you can take that ethics test, probably knock it out in less than 30 minutes. When I do it each year, I think it takes me about maybe 5 or 10 minutes. And then the publication 5101, that's a publication geared to that intake and interview and quality review training. That's the next step of your certification. And we'll talk about the intake and interview sheet, also known as a lead sheet, and you get really familiar with that in the VITA program.
Are we
And then
getting,
also,
yeah, are we getting a copy of all this so we don't have to write it down?
you need a copy of what? Michelle, I heard a copy. Did you capture that?
Yeah, the presentation and everything will be shared to who just asked that question. I'm sorry, I didn't see who asked it.
Oh, yeah, yes. As far as the PowerPoint, yes, this PowerPoint is going to be available, and then we're going to revisit a lot of these forms during the next 5 sessions. So you'll get really familiar with this. The next one is what is called the quality site requirements for alternative filing. And what that means is there's different ways to do the VITA program. So I'll give you the example. I think, and Robert, keep me honest, you guys still do the drop off at St. Killian. So what that means is taxpayers will come in, they'll complete that intake and interview sheet, they'll provide their ID, their social security number, photocopies will be made, and then they'll drop off their tax documents, and then they may come back in a week or two. And that's called the drop off method, which is an alternative filing method. And there's different ways to do it. I used to run a program where it was all done via Zoom, and we'd look at documents via Zoom and we'd interview the taxpayers. But again, that particular filing method models is reflected in the publication 5324. Most of the time at your site, you'll probably do what we call face-to-face. They'll come in, they'll complete that intake sheet, they'll relinquish tax documents, an interview will be conducted, and we prepare the return, then we give the return to the individual. That would be a courtesy copy, and then we e-file the tax return for them. Next slide. Okay, and so the 13614C, we'll show you this after the break. This is the intake and interview sheet. It's also used for quality review. And again, we quality review every single return. And so we do use this intake and interview sheet for every return. It's a lead sheet. It's helpful. And then, of course, you have VITA sites that have maybe a local information sheet. I know St. Killian's has had one in the past, and they'll probably have one this coming season. And so what that means is the intake and interview sheet is going to be used, and then that local sheet will be an additional one that will be used. But again, the 13614C, that's the English version. There are many different types of languages available, but again, the 13614C, that is used on every single return that we prepare. And then it says on the screen, the taxpayer completes it. That's true. And the volunteer perfects it. That's true. So that means we walk through or interview the taxpayer. And sometimes we have to check a no when there's a yes, and we will make changes to it. And then the quality reviewer is going to use that intake sheet along with the tax documents to conduct a review. And the review is also conducted with that taxpayer typically sitting with the reviewer. And then different languages. So, for example, at St. Killian's, I've seen in the past, they've had Spanish intake and interview sheets. At my site, I teach at a college. We have Spanish, we have Vietnamese, and then of course most of them are going to be in English. But again, this is to make people feel comfortable. And when someone walks into your site and English is not their second language, we want to do everything we can to help them out. And you'd be surprised how many different volunteers will be at your site. Like at my site, we had Vietnamese speakers, we had a Korean speaker, we had Spanish speakers. So you want to help them out as best you can. And if you can't help them out because you don't have someone who speaks the language, then you can call that over the phone interpreter service, and you can get the job done, if you will.
Quick question regarding the interpreter services, because I know, like you had mentioned before, ASL is a thing. Um, will that information be provided to the staff at each location? Because I was only made aware of translation services maybe in the last month, maybe less the last one or two um, days of our service this last year. So will that phone number or app, I don't know what it would be made publicly available and shown to each site?
The short answer is yes, because what happens is your site coordinators most likely will ensure a couple of their volunteers go through the over the phone interpreter certification. And so they're going to be at the site and they're available to call that particular service when we have that taxpayer who comes in who speaks maybe Mandarin, and we have no one at the site who speaks Mandarin. So yes, the short answer is yes. And then your site coordinators, a lot of them are very well trained, they're very experienced, and so they will know about that over the phone interpreter service. And if they don't, then what happens is usually during some of the training that we offer, they'll figure it out and then they go through the training themselves. But it's like, for example, at my site, we're going to have that. And we usually have two people because, again, people come in late, people can't make it, they go on vacation, whatever. But that over the phone interpreter service is very important. It's critical. And for example, again, my site it's Coastline College. We have people who come in who speak only Vietnamese, and we have those intake sheets in Vietnamese, and then we have our Vietnamese speakers. And you cannot believe how comfortable people feel when they come in that someone speaks their language. And that's the whole idea. That we have these resources available. We want to use them because we want people, first of all, to be comfortable. We want to build a rapport with them, and we want to prepare a return. And that's important. So yes, the short answer is yes. And what site do you work at? I didn't catch the name. Was that
Justin. Yeah, I'm Goodwill, Orange County.
okay? Okay. And so I'm not sure where your site is, but are you the site coordinator?
I will be, yes.
Oh, then that makes it even easier. So then that's an opportunity for you and one of your volunteers to do the certification on OPI. And it's a short certification, and then you're ready to go. You just call the number and help out your people. I would imagine if you're in Orange County, you probably have a lot of Spanish speakers and Vietnamese and maybe Mandarin.
Yes, a good number of those, and a couple other languages here and there too. So it will definitely be helpful, and I'll be looking into that. Thank you so much.
Sure. Okay, and then let's jump into the next document. And you're going to see copies of all of these, not right now, but we're doing the one over the world, if you will. And so the 13615, this is your contract, if you will. It's called the Volunteer Standards of Conduct Agreement. And this means you're going to do the right thing, you're going to do it to the best of your ability. And then on the reverse side of the document, if you will, is your certification levels, your various levels of certification, the administrative information pertaining to you. So that contract, as a site coordinator, I get those contracts from all of my volunteers. I put them in a booklet. If I need to call them, if I need to email them, I've got their contact information. And then that is also essentially an inspectable item by the IRS if they do visit the site to do a review. And so this is a document. When I go to different sites to work, I bring that with me to show that I'm certified along with my ID, and then I can be put to work if I go to another site. And then if you happen to be a tax professional, and this would be either an attorney or an enrolled agent or a CPA or a California Tax Education Council registered tax preparer, then you will be able to get what is called continuing education hours. And so if you're a CTEC person, you've got a CTEC number, and you're going to bring in your prepared tax identification number. I'm an enrolled agent, and so when I volunteer at a site, I can get continuing education credit. I have to show them my PTIN number. And so this is something, if you are a professional, you can get continuing education credit. You cannot get qualifying education through the VITA program. You have to take a course, but you can get continuing education. And then the next item, this is one of those IRS publications. There are many. I think the last time I looked, there's well over 1,000 publications. And one publication that I have used again and again in the VITA program is a publication 528. And this is going to happen. It happens every year. We have people walk into my site and they go, Jerry, this is the item of income that I have. And I look at it. I'm thinking, I've never seen that before. I've seen a lot of stuff, but I've never seen that. And so one of the go-to documents that I have in addition to the publication 4012 is the publication 525, which talks about items that are taxable and non-taxable. And there are a lot of non-taxable items that simply don't go on a tax return. And you're going to get really familiar with those. And I've had people look at me before and, hey, Jerry, you're a tax person. You've done this for, 4 decades. Why don't you know this? And I said, well, that's easy. There are many things out there. And if you go to your medical doctor and ask your doctor, hey, I have this condition, she'll look at you sometimes and say, I don't know that. I got to look it up. Tax people know a lot of things. They don't know everything. And so I'm not shy when someone's asked me, what is this? And I say, I don't know. I've never seen it, but we'll look it up and we'll figure it out. And that 525 is a really helpful document. Another document, this is for self-employed, and we'll talk about the Schedule C for self-employment. So think of, for example, let's say you've got a friend or a family member who's a dog walker, and they leave the house and they go pick up their client, their dogs, and they walk them around for other people. And most likely that would be self-employment. And so that's something that we assist people with in the VITA program with self-employment. And the publication 334, which is revised every year, this is great for self-employed individuals. And this is another go-to document. And there are continuing education credits. There's a publication that talks about that, the 5362. And what happens is that continuing education is going to be routed through the United Way, and then it goes to the IRS, and then our IRS representative, that Christine Gallardo, that lady we talked about, that she'll make sure that it's essentially recorded at the IRS level, if you will. So if you are a tax practitioner and you want or need continuing education credit to include an hour of ethics, you can get it in the VITA program. But of course, you have to certify at a certain level. You have to engage in certain activities, and then your site coordinator again routes that information to the United Way, who routes it to the IRS. And then our focus today is the IRS, but we obviously will talk about the FTB, and later on in the series of Zooms, we will talk about the 540 in detail. But the instructions to the 540, which is the individual tax return for California, very helpful document. And there's a lot of franchise tax board documents that you'll get familiar with. Okay, this is we're not going to spend a lot of time on this, but want to make you aware that Franchise Tax Board, they obviously participate in the VITA program, and there's a lot of documents out there for the Franchise Tax Board. And every once in a while, you will get stumped, or your site coordinator will get stumped on a tax question regarding the state of California. So one thing you want to remember, generally, when we prepare a federal return, generally what's going to happen, the state return is going to be generated. We don't have to do anything with the state return, but sometimes we do. And when we do have to make changes to the state return, we're going to show you how to get into a state return, the software, and make those changes. And I have to get a little specific here. So the state of California, I always tell people this, think of the state of California as a cat and the federal government as a dog, two completely different species. And so what happens is the state of California does not agree or conform to the federal government on every issue. Now, I'll give you a quick example. And so let's say you buy a ticket in the California lottery and you win $5,000 in the California lottery. On your federal return, it's going to be a taxable event. On your California return, it's not taxed because California doesn't tax it. And that's called the nonconformity issue. And so we're going to show you how to get into the California return and make changes if they're not done automatically. So that California lottery is an example of something that's not done automatically. And there is a publication, very useful publication called the Publication 1001 Franchise Tax Board. And that talks about what are called those nonconformity and conformity issues. So an example of a conformity issue would be W-2 wages. And this is the general rule. There are certain exceptions. So let's say you're a wage earner, you're based in Orange County, and let's say you make $50,000. Well, chances are your California return is going to also reflect $50,000 of income. And that's an example of conformity. So you're going to see that conformity and nonconformity issue from time to time in the VITA site. And so you're not going to get nervous. You're going to go straight to the 1001. And we will equip you with enough information when we go through California that you'll be able to make those changes on the California return if needed. And there's a bunch of other information. I personally have used the site map at the very top. And what it is a laundry list of topics and discussions of California issues. And again, for the most part, usually when we prepare a return, we don't have to make changes. But when you do have to make changes, then you want to know where to go. And the sitemap is a great place to get that information. And then, of course, we will introduce you to the software where you can make those changes. And then there's other things that we're going to talk about in this particular series of Zoom sessions. Head of household filing status. There's a sheet, there's a document, if you will, in the software. We're going to show you about that. And we're going to talk about the health coverage in California. And that's something you're going to use on every return or see on every return. At the very bottom of this particular screen, there is a service called Kiplinger, and they do a really good job and they demystify all the changes. Now, that Kiplinger is for federal tax items, and I use that year to year. I incorporate that in my class. They do, again, do a real good job talking about the changes in the tax law. All right, let's see. Let's go to the next slide. And okay, great. All right, let's jump into our ethics screening and interviewing and taxpayer management. And so the first certification that you'll take is that so-called ethics certification. And then, of course, anytime you sit for an exam, you have to have some training. You have to have some reference material. And so your reference material for that particular training is the publication 4961, which is also built into the Link and Learn program once it's been posted by the IRS. It has yet to be posted for tax year 2025. But again, that would be the document. And typically what I do is I look at the inside sheet, inside cover, and that's the executive summary, if you will. And then I take the examination, which again is a very short exam, takes about 5, maybe 10 minutes of that. And then, of course, the golden rule, we all learned this in some form or fashion when we were kids. You want to treat people the right way. You want to do things. The last thing you want to do is run afoul of your site coordinator. And typically, that's just not the case. What happens is most people are dedicated. They want to do the right thing. They want to help out. And they treat people respectfully. And they make sure that they don't share information that doesn't need to be shared. And again, that's that golden rule. The next item that we're going to talk about is screening, and screening is really important. If you've ever been a screener, you're going to see individuals try to essentially get past you to get their return to be completed. And what happens is we find out that we've got a taxpayer who's not qualified to use the service. And there are many different situations where a taxpayer is going to be unqualified or not qualified or outside of the scope. And so, what you want to do if you're working at a site, you want to have one of your sharpest people to be one of your screeners. And they could be a greeter slash screener, but the bottom line is your screeners have to be aware of the scope of service. Now, they're not going to memorize the entire thing. That's why there's an entire section in the publication 4012 dedicated to scope of service. But I want to talk about a couple things. One, and I do the same thing, sit down and talk to someone, and they ask you, hey, what's up? What's going on? What's your issue? And you unload on them and you tell them all sorts of stuff that doesn't really pertain to the situation. And that's going to happen. And so you're going to use your powers of persuasion. You're going to use your personal services skill to basically guide the discussion toward tax because they've come in here and yeah, we'll talk about obviously other things, but the focus is going to be taxation. And so when you have someone who's giving you the white noise information that doesn't pertain, this is what I do. I'll let them talk for a little bit because they're a person, they want to get things off their chest. I got it. But at the end of the day, if you will, end of the conversation, kind of re-guide them back to, let's talk about your tax return. Let's see if you got all your documents. Let's make sure you've completed the intake sheet. And let's see if we are ready to prepare your return based on the information that you provided. And that's going to happen. Like I say, I have clients that we're talking VITA clients who'd sit there for 15, 20 minutes and they were talking about something else because that was on their mind. But again, you got to guide them back to, hey, why are you here? Let's talk about your taxes and let's get this done. Another thing that a lot of people have virtual currency. I mean, I've actually purchased virtual currency. I forget which one I have, but virtual currency is a lot of people have it. And if you buy virtual currency and you hold it, that's okay. Virtual currency, we're going to find out later in the series here, it is a capital asset. We'll define a capital asset. And when you sell a capital asset, you sometimes have a gain, sometimes have a loss. So if you buy virtual currency, we can help you out. If you sell virtual currency, that is outside the scope of VITA. And so that means we do not assist the taxpayers, and so we'll have to give them the other options. And sometimes they'll plead with you. They may beg with you, but at the end of the day, you're going to say, I'm sorry, that's outside of the scope of service. And again, that's listed in that scope of service section in the 4012, and they're going to have to find another alternative. We can't help them. And here's another thing, and I've done this in the past because I'm human. I've made a lot of mistakes. If you make exceptions in the VITA program, then what happens is you might have a return that goes to a preparer and they don't know how to do it. Or they're going to say, wait a second, this is outside the scope of service. And so you don't want to make exceptions. Another thing, if you make an exception, they're going to tell their friends, and then your site is going to be rushed by all these people who want this return to be completed, this type of return, and that's outside the scope of service. So just politely decline and tell them this return is outside the scope of service. We cannot help you. We're not trained to help you. You need to go somewhere else. And of course, you do it in a respectful and dignified manner. But at the end of the day, if you look people in the eyes and say, we can't help you, and this is why we can't help you, they're going to get the message and they're going to go find someone who can help them. And sometimes it will be a paid preparer. And we recognize that. But again, our program is limited. And then the intake sheet, actually, it's called the intake and interview and quality review sheet. There is a training before you take that certification, and it's the 5101. And usually you read it for maybe 15, 20 minutes, and you're ready to take the intake and interview sheet test. We, of course, review information returns as part of this intake and interview. And when you hear the term information return, There are, I don't know if there's thousands, but there's hundreds and hundreds of them. An example of an information return is a Form W-2 for an employee. Another example would be a 1099. There's different types of 1099s. And information returns are going to be presented to tax preparers or interviewers, and you're going to review them along with the intake and interview sheet that the taxpayer completes. And here's something that you're going to see, and it depends on your site coordinator. You're going to have, and usually it's the younger adults, usually they'll come in and everything is electronic, and they'll say, well, I've got my W-2 and my 1099s, but they're all on my iPhone or they're all on my computer, and I don't have hard copies. I don't have paper copies. And what I do on my site is said, no problem. You're going to have to relinquish your electronic device along with your username and password. And if you're comfortable with that, then we're going to take that up and we're going to prepare the return for you. But at the end of the day, the taxpayer has to relinquish their information returns because they're probably going to have at least a W-2. And then a thorough interview, you're going to get really good at it, especially if you're one of the interviewers. And in the training, the 13614C, we go through that particular document. And so you feel comfortable on what it looks like and how to go through it and how to perfect it once the taxpayer completes it. And then here's another thing. Again, a lot of people think when they go to a VITA site, they're going to get assistance and it's going to happen today. Well, a lot of things happen. Maybe they're outside of the scope of service, or maybe they didn't bring in certain documents with them. And if you don't bring in certain documents, then we can't help you at least today. And so at my site, a lot of taxpayers come in, they're in covered California. And one of the forms they need to bring in is what is called the IRS Form 1095A. And if they don't have it with them, I make notes. And then I tell them, when you come back next time, bring that document so we can help you. And that's going to happen. I mean, think about your day-to-day life. I'm sure you have forgotten documents before when you go to the bank or the doctor. And it's all about tell them this is what we can do for you. This is when we can do it. And so if you need to come back, that's okay. All right, next
Should
slide.
we should we pre-screen them over the phone when they call in to make sure they bring all the documents so they don't have to come back as often?
Well, there are pre-screening over the telephone, and that's a great way to do it. I know United Way does a great job, and so yes, when you do a telephonic pre-screen, you're going to go through that laundry list, which includes all the various documents, the filing status, if they have any kids, do they have all of their documents ready to go? And you're going to see at the VITA site sometimes they don't have all the documents, and so we're going to be helpful to them. We're going to explain what they need, where they can get it. And we do that a lot at my site. People will come back and say, I didn't bring that today. No, no worries. Come back next week. But pre-screening over the telephone, you can do it. You want to have a good understanding of the 13614C, the intake and interview sheet, and then just go through the various documents, the tax documents the taxpayer needs to bring in. Okay, next, taxpayer management. This is really geared toward the site coordinator, but then again, we all are involved in taxpayer management. And so usually when a taxpayer comes in, they're appreciative of the service, which makes it a lot easier for us. But at the end of the day, whether they're young or old, whether they are sophisticated or unsophisticated, you got to manage your taxpayers because it's your site. And so you have to manage the physical flow of taxpayers. When people come back with their documents, you have to have essentially a priority list who you're going to take care of first. And your site coordinator, that's the person who's running the show. And if they're not there, then there's an assistant site coordinator. And so the site coordinator, operations manager, they're going around, they're making sure things are what they should be. They're getting involved when they need to get involved. And sometimes they're going to make that hard decision. I'm sorry, we can't help you. And I've had situations where sometimes taxpayers are so disruptive. I sat down with them and said, you need to leave. You can come back later, but you need to leave. You gotta cool off." And that's going to happen from time to time. But again, the vast majority of our clients are very appreciative. So your site coordinators run the show. Your greeters, as I said before, they are important. Maybe they're only certified at the volunteer standards of conduct level, but that's the first person you meet. And if you meet someone who is happy, they know the way it's supposed to be, and they're going to get you into that particular tax preparer or interviewer, you're going to feel good about it. So greeters, uh, uh, what I do on my site, my greeters typically are going to be certified at the advanced level. Not a requirement, but you want them to be knowledgeable. But at a minimum, volunteer standards of conduct. And then again, they have to be helpful. They have to know about the site. I think that's important. And that makes sense. If you go to a business and someone greets you and they know what's going on, you feel good about it and you want to keep going and using that business. And then you have to manage your tax preparers. Even though tax preparers are volunteers, you still have to schedule them. You have to follow up if they're not going to show up, and you have to ask them, "Hey, we've got you scheduled for today," and you've got to manage that. That's what a site coordinator does. And of course, as a tax preparer, if you're not going to make it, well, like any job, you call up your boss, your site coordinator, and say, "I'm not going to make it. I got a flat tire. My child is sick. Can't do it today. I'll be back next week." And that's important. And then face to face, this is something, again, most people are very appreciative of the service, but you have to be frank with individuals. If something's not working, you got to tell them this is not working, or you got to tell them, I need you to go and go get the documents because you're missing this particular document, and this is why we need it. And just have that conversation. And that's why building rapport with your clientele is very important. Building rapport with your taxpayer is important. And again, face to face, it's tough because a lot of, like, at least at my site, a lot of my volunteers are young students. They're like 20, 22 years of age, and a lot of them don't have experience in interviewing taxpayers. And so that's another obstacle, if you will. You have to get past that. You have to train yourself. You have to be trained, and you have to have some experience, and then you can get past that. And then we already talked about the virtual models. If someone is going to do a virtual model, i.e. the drop off, then what happens is there's a form that the taxpayer will complete. Of course, they also complete the intake and interview. They give you the tax documents, but they'll complete the virtual form, which is the 14446. And then that is included in the package that goes to the tax preparer. The taxpayer leaves the site. The preparer prepares the return, and they're going to use that 14446 again for virtual tax preparation. And there's different ways to do it. I can share with you what I do at my site. Taxpayer comes in, we have them fill out the intake sheet. We make copies of the identification. We make copies of the Social Security card. We make copies of the documents, the tax documents. We have them fill out the 14446. We put all of that in the review it, put it all in the envelope, tax release, and they come back the next week. Again, that is one way to do virtual. There are different ways to do it. All right, so this is the introduction to Link and Learn. And when you talk about Link and Learn, that is the IRS site where you're actually going to certify to prepare returns. Now, if you've certified in 2024, then you have a lot of knowledge about how to use the site. 2025, whether you're new or whether you're a returning volunteer, you're going to certify in 2025. And 2025, as it says on the screen, that particular site is to be published by the IRS. It hasn't been published yet. I asked Christine yesterday, and she said basically stand by. So it could open up tomorrow, it could open up in a week or two, but again, to be published. And once it does open up, then and we're going to show you in the series here how to actually go into Link and Learn, and you'll be able to read the materials and prepare engage in certification. And when you hear the term certification, that means test. When you hear the term test, that means certification, same thing. So here are the various certification levels that you can be at, and we'll just talk about them briefly. The first one is the Volunteer Standards of Conduct, basically the ethics test. It's a short test, and I think last time I looked, I think it had 10 questions. And so again, it's a short test. You read the material, and then you take it. The next one is, and these are sequential. So the next one to be the intake and interview. You'll read the publication, or certainly a portion of the publication, and then you'll take the intake and interview certification. And then not everybody, usually just the site coordinator, the assistant site coordinator. If you want to, you can do it. But I would recommend you stay away from the site coordinator certification unless you're an assistant site coordinator or a site coordinator. Then you have to take it. Basic is your next level. Basic is going to be the W-2s, the form W-2s for our wage earners. It's going to be interest income, dividend income, things like that. The advanced, that's going to be your Schedule C. It's going to be your capital gains and losses, things like that. And simply because it says advanced doesn't mean you have to be a genius at taxes. It simply means another level, a little bit more complication, if you will. And this is the way I do it. People are going to be different. If you're going to work at my site, I want you to take the basic certification and then the advanced certification. That gives you a fundamentals, a lot of background. If you want to just take the advanced certification after you take the intake and interview, you can do that too. But I recommend do the basic and do the advanced. And I highly recommend become advanced certified because it's a little frustrating for a lot of people when everybody's basic and you have someone who has an advanced tax return and we can't help them out and we have to wait for somebody to come back from lunch. And so, again, I recommend do the basic and the advanced. Over the phone, interpreting, that's OPI, and that's actually a certification. And I recommend that every site have at least a couple of those. Those are helpful. This is a certification that has been taken away. It's no longer in service. It's called the Circular 230. And so if you did that last year, it's not going to be available to you for tax year 2025. And then military. Military would be active duty, reserve component. And if you are military certified, then you can prepare a Schedule E as an echo, and that's rental property for military folks. And there's not a lot of sites that do that, but military certification, we do it at Coastline College where I have my site, and we prepare returns mostly for folks who've gotten off of active duty. And then the international certification, this is something we can help people out with foreign earned income exclusion. So think of someone overseas. They're working overseas. I'll pick a country, let's say Spain. They're working in Spain. They're a U.S. citizen and they're working for, let's say a company and maybe they're an IT person. And then what happens is they come back to the United States and now they're in the U.S. and they can exclude, if they meet all the requirements, they can exclude some or all of their monies that they earn in Spain. And we'd be able to assist them by preparing a form 2555, which is a foreign earned income exclusion. And in order to do that, you have to be internationally certified. So that's another certification level. And then the other certification level, which very few sites do, because I have to confess, it's a little bit involved. It's the foreign students. This is the one where you have to know a little bit about tax treaties. And this is typically, I know Cal State Fullerton, I think they have a site that does the foreign student thing up there. And that's a different form. It's called the Form 1040 NR. And then Puerto Rico, the only site that I'm aware of that does Puerto Rican returns would be Camp Pendleton. That's a Marine base in San Diego County. I've never certified myself on the Puerto Rican level, and you probably won't either. Okay, and then as it says on the very top, it says link and learn, create an account. So we're going to show you, before we leave today, how to create an account in Link and Learn. And you have to create an account to use Link and Learn, i.e. to certify. And when you create an account, you're going to share administrative information with the contractor for the IRS, and then you're going to be able to use Link and Learn. And then some people in the past say, well, Jerry, if I provide all this information, what's going to happen? I said, well, the worst that can happen, you might get a request for a survey via email. They're not going to call you up and try to sell you life insurance or shampoo. That's not going to happen. And then at the very bottom, it says Practice Lab. This is that TaxSlayer Pro tax preparation software platform, and you have to create an account to use that also. And same thing, you're sharing a little information, administrative information about yourself, and so you can use the practice lab. Now, as it says here, the certification is not available, but the 2025 software is available. And so, and of course, the 2025 software is going to be different than the 2024. And again, you have to register to use the software. Okay, next slide. Okay, and this is important because the Public Law 119-21, that's the One Big Beautiful Bill Act that passed in July, and it had significant changes to the tax code. And those changes, you're going to see them in tax year 2025. So we're going to talk a little bit about some of the provisions that you're going to see at the VITA site. These are all in scope, or are the ones that I'm going to talk about and focus on are in scope. And so we're going to jump through those. So let's go to our next slide. And so a lot of references. If you're one of those people that loved to read the actual statutory provisions, maybe you're an attorney, Public Law 119-21. If you clicked on that URL, that would get you into the actual legislation. It's a hard read because legislation is a hard read, but that's the law. And then if you want an easier read, then you can see these various documents, IRS documents, Journal of Accountancy. I use that all the time because it has attorneys, CPAs, and enrolled agents, and they take tax law and they get into the very detail. The Tax Foundation, this is a great organization that it's all mostly federal stuff. And so again, those are some references to the One Big Beautiful Bill Act. Next slide. This is details, various law firms, accounting firms, and they opined on the One Big Beautiful Bill Act. Next slide. And same thing. And before we leave this one, just real quick, the publication 3, the Armed Forces Tax Guide, if you're not going to certify in the military certification, then you don't need to worry about that. But if you come to my site and you're working at my site, you will be certified on the military level, and you'll be familiar with the publication 3. Next slide. Okay, and I remember this legislation was going through Congress, and some people were really super happy about it. And next slide. And a lot of people were not happy about it. And the next slide. And some people, they didn't know, they didn't care. And next slide. But we do care because there's a lot of changes with the One Big Beautiful Bill Act that will affect tax returns for tax year 2025 that we're going to be preparing in just a few months. And as it says on the bottom of the screen, this is, however you look at it, it is landmark legislation. This is a big, big deal. There are lots and lots of changes to the Internal Revenue Code, a lot, and Treasury regulations. Okay, now before we go through these slides, I want to point something out. The One Big Beautiful Bill Act, it has changes not only for tax year 2025, but changes going forward. And so for the tax rates, this is going to be something that's after December 31st. So in other words, starting in tax year 2026. Next slide. This is something that's going to affect us this year. This is for tax year 2025, the standard deduction, which we're going to learn about. You're going to learn that on a tax return, you can take, and this is the general rule, either the greater of the standard deduction or itemized deduction. So we'll define itemized deductions, but the standard deduction has increased. This is for most people. You're going to get an additional standard deduction amount if you are blind according to the tax definition or you are a senior. And here's the good thing about the standard deduction. The standard deduction at the end of the day reduces taxable income, which reduces taxes. And you don't have to memorize the standard deduction. It's built into the software. Next slide. And then this is something I've heard many, many times. A lot of people were very upset when back about, I think about 7 or 8 years ago, the state and local tax cap was changed. It was reduced down to 10,000. So when you hear the term state and local taxes, so-called SALT, when you pay state income tax, when you pay local income tax or different types of taxes, there was a limit in tax year 2024. In other words, the return from last year. For our tax return 2025, that has significantly been raised. It's been raised to a maximum of 40,000. So big changes for some of our taxpayers. And then as you can see on the screen, it's going to go up from there. So this is one of the big changes on the Schedule A as an alpha itemized deductions. And you're going to see that we're going to have that in our discussion of the Schedule A. Next slide. Personal exemptions, it simply means that this One Big Beautiful Bill Act made it permanent. If you go back 10 years ago, exemptions had a dollar amount associated with it. And now exemptions have tax credits associated with them. Next slide. So this is going to affect us this year, this so-called senior deduction. I remember when this was being discussed and reading the electronic media. And of course, the electronic media, I guess sometimes they do a great job and sometimes they don't. But I remember there was a big discussion about changes and in the Social Security, not taxing Social Security. Well, that's not the case. They were talking about the senior deduction, which is a good thing for seniors. And there's an additional amount they can deduct on their return, which at the end of the day is going to reduce their income tax. And as you can see at the bottom of the screen, there's a brand new form. So if you're returning to VITA, this is a form which you're going to show you today. It's called the Schedule A-1 Additional Deductions. And it has a number of things on it. So this will be created automatically based on the entries in the software. But this is something you'll see on the returns for seniors. And keep in mind, we are next year when we start preparing returns in January, February, March, we're going to be preparing returns primarily for tax year 2025. And so you're going to see the Schedule A-1 on those 2025 returns. And then there's also, and if you can go back to that, Michelle, there's also you're going to hear the term phase outs. MAGI is modified adjusted gross income, but you just want to remember this in the VITA program. A lot of these phase outs are not going to pertain because we work with low and moderate income taxpayers. And so you're not going to see an MFJ is married filing joint. You're not going to see a married filing joint filer with income of $150,000. That's outside of the scope of VITA. So you're usually not going to see these phase out in the VITA program. Next slide. Tax credits, we will talk about that in detail during these Zoom sessions. And the child tax credit, it has increased, and this is automatic. And you have what is called a non-refundable portion. And when you hear that term non-refundable, it simply means a dollar for dollar reduction of the tax. So you're going to calculate tax, or the software will calculate tax, and then you may be eligible for certain non-refundable credits, which is a dollar for dollar reduction of the tax. And you can reduce individual income tax down to zero, which would be a good thing for the taxpayer if they have sufficient non-refundable credits. And then there's also a refundable portion of the child tax credit, and we get into that. And again, phase out doesn't pertain to VITA. And then you are going to see this for individuals who have dependents, and those dependents don't qualify for the child tax credit. There is a other credit, and that's $500. That's been around for a while. Next slide. This is something that we're not going to spend a lot of time on. It's automatic. You're going to see it on the Schedule C for sole proprietors. And this is the qualified business income deduction. If you did taxes last year, there was basically it was 20% of your net income, which is a great deduction for taxpayers. Well, what's going to happen? It's going to change. That's the bottom line. But as you can see at the bottom of the screen, it doesn't change until tax year 2026. And we're in tax year 2025. Next slide. And then sometimes you're going to hear people talk about the so-called consumer price index or these changes that are based on inflation. Well, this is the change or the index that's used. It's called the Chain Consumer Price Index for all urban consumers. You're thinking, what's that? Well, the Department of Labor, Bureau of Labor Statistics puts it out. And all we need to worry about is when those changes occur because of inflation, they're based on this particular index. Next slide. Mortgage interest, you can see at the very bottom of the screen, it says it's effective after December 31st. And so that means it's going to affect tax year 2026. Next slide. Casualty losses, we don't usually see this in the VITA program, but we want to point something out. Let's go to the next slide. You're going to have disasters all the time, forest fires, mudslides, typhoons, hurricanes, whatever. When there is some type of disaster, and in Orange County, we had these disasters a couple years ago, then what happens is there is a determination that's made by IRS, approved by, I guess, the Secretary of the Treasury. And then what happens is there is a postponement to either file a return or in some cases pay taxes. If that happens, if we have a disaster of some kind, either before the season starts or during the season, what will happen? Information will bubble down to your site coordinator, and your site coordinator will inform you of any changes to a federal tax deadline or paying tax. And if you go back a few years ago to COVID, you might remember the tax season was extended a few months. So that does happen from time to time. Next slide. And next slide. When you hear the term itemized deductions, it's simply a laundry list of items that Congress has come up with, and you're going to get familiar with the Schedule A as an alpha, and well, I think we'll leave it at that. Itemized deductions, again, you probably read about this in the electronic papers. All of these changes are effective on January 1st, 2026, and that means for tax year 2026. Next slide. I think I've had this a couple times. The bicycle commuting reimbursement effective for tax year 2026 next year. Next slide, I should say. Moving expenses, we don't do moving expenses in the VITA program unless you have a member of the military. They have to be what is called active duty or active guard and reserve. And that's something that we only work with military folks. Next slide. Gambling, this is really interesting in the VITA program. Again, we work with low and moderate income taxpayers. I see a lot of people gambling. A lot of my VITA clients gamble. I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, but they do. And so when you have gambling winnings, you're going to report them on your federal return. If you have gambling losses under current tax law, your losses can be taken all the way up to your winnings. The change that's reflected here on this screen, that's effective next tax year. So you're not going to see this in 2025. Next slide. Able, just be aware there's an Able account. You may get questions on that, and so this is something you wanna have in the back of your mind. I see this from time to time, and you're going to get people ask you questions. And if you're comfortable, then you can say, "Well, let's go to the publication 4012," and if not, you can bounce it up to the site coordinator. Next slide. Student loan discharge. This is effective 2026 tax year. And so we'll move on. Okay, this is something you're going to see. You're definitely going to see at the VITA site because there's a lot of people that get tips. I think every time I go to lunch, there's a tip jar there. So it's either in the culture, there's an expectation. They may even chase you out of the place if you don't give a tip to them. But the bottom line is This provision is going to be effective in tax year 2025. And these are for what I call qualified tips. And so you may have a wage earner or a self-employed individual who's receiving tips, and that is possible. And we're going to show you in the software for tax year 2025 how these tips are not going to be taxed. And of course, there's a limitation. And when it was sold in the newspaper some time ago, I remember the mantra was no tax on tips. Well, there's a however. There's a limit to that. And you can see the limit on the screen here. The limit is $25,000 for tips. And then at the very bottom of the screen, it says you're going to use the Schedule A-1, which is new this year, for additional deductions. And so this particular item will be populated on the Schedule A1. Okay. All right, and the next one, overtime. Again, same thing. I remember when this came out many months ago, the mantra was no tax on overtime. Well, there's a however. It depends on your filing status. And so if you're married filing joint MFJ and you qualify, then the maximum deduction is $25,000 for overtime. And of course, your employer is going to report that to you, probably on a W-2, but again, however they report it, you can take that deduction on your return. There's a phase out. We don't worry about that in VITA. It's too high. But again, all of this information is going to be reflected on the Schedule A1, that new schedule. And so you're going to have people come in, hey, I heard there's no tax on tips. And you're going to say, well, there's a however, and the however is there's a limitation. And for you, if you're a single individual, it's 12,500, and that is the however. Next slide. Okay, here's a big one. You're probably going to see a lot of this. People buy cars all the time. And if you had an automobile, a personal automobile, and you purchased it and you financed it, which is pretty typical, you could not deduct the interest on that vehicle for your personal vehicle used for personal reasons. You couldn't do that. And now for tax year 2025, it's changed. And of course, there's a couple of howevers. And one is you buy a vehicle and then you have a lien or a loan on it, I should say. And there's other items. So let's go to the next page and look at this. And so now it starts to get just a little complicated. So you're going to ask these questions, and this information should be available to you. The vehicle has to be assembled in the U.S. There's going to be a VIN, and that's a vehicle identification number. And so when someone buys a car, they get all the paperwork from the dealership, and it has make and model and year, and it also has the VIN on it. So that's information that the taxpayer has to bring in. And then the deduction is limited. Your computer will limit it to $10,000 per year. You don't have to worry about the phase out in the VITA program. And here's the big thing. If you're as old as me or older, you probably remember when you could itemize and take a deduction on your Schedule A for interest, and that was many, many years ago. Well, under this particular provision, if you don't itemize, you're not a Schedule A person, you can still take this deduction up to $10,000. And it's going to be reflected on the Schedule A1, which is additional deductions. And at this point, let's see, Michelle, can you bring up that, or maybe I can bring up the Schedule A1? Are you able to do that?
Sure, let me bring that up. One moment.
And as she's bringing that up, just a quick comment. What happens when you start using the software? You're going to find that the software is pretty user-friendly. You're going to find people at your VITA site who've used this software hundreds, if not thousands of times before. And so you're going to get real comfortable with the software. So this is that Schedule 1-A, additional deductions. And let's go through the parts that you may see at the VITA site. So part 2, if you can cursor, there we go. These are the so-called no tax on tips. Well, we know there's a limitation. So this will be populated after you make entries in the software. And so this would be generated when you print out the tax return, and the taxpayer may say, "What's this?" And well, this is the form that shows the no tax on a certain amount of tips that you've received. And then how about the next part? And then this is the no tax on overtime. Again, there's a limitation, and so this will be generated. This portion will be generated based on the entries in the software. And then can you go to page 2? Is that possible? Oh, good. Okay, so we're probably going to see this. I mean, a lot of people buy cars, and when you buy a car and a lot of people finance it, they can take advantage of this particular deduction, if you will. And somehow they call it no tax on car loan interest. That's kind of a strange name. This is basically a deduction that's allowed if the taxpayer qualifies. And of course, there's a limit. And so again, once you make those entries in the software, part 4 for the car loan interest deduction will generate. And again, there's certain information you need. You need that VIN. And so if you ask me right now, Jerry, what's your VIN? I'm thinking, I don't know. I got to go look at my car, look at some paperwork. And so when the taxpayers come in, they may say, gee whiz, that information's in my, maybe in my iPhone or maybe in my car. But you need to get that VIN, vehicle identification number. Okay, and then next. And then the next one is the deduction. This is for seniors, so 65 and older. So this is an additional amount that seniors are going to get, which at the end of the day is going to benefit them, reducing their taxable income. So this is one of the new forms you're going to see. All right, and if we can go back to the presentation, Michelle, thank you.
And we have a few questions that need to be answered at the end of this session.
Okay, we'll be stopping in just a minute here, so let's go back to our presentation and then we'll do that. So just a couple other things. There's changes to the adoption credit. When someone adopts, they're paying usually attorney fees, adoption fees. This is a big credit, and you can see right here that the adoption credit, there's the refundable portion, and this is a rather large credit. Next slide. So this is something you're going to see on a lot of tax returns, the child independent care expense credit. This has changed. And so this credit, it's going up to a total of 50% of what are called qualifying expenses. And then as you can see at the very bottom of the screen, it says it applies after December 31st. And so that means tax year 2026. And we're in tax year 2025. Next slide. And this is right from the legislation. It's actually called the Trump account, which is kind of interesting. Usually you don't name stuff after presidents. Even the Affordable Care Act, some people call it Obamacare. It's not Obamacare, it's the Affordable Care Act. But anyway, this doesn't apply till tax year 2026. This particular provision for scholarship granting organizations, you may bump into this. This doesn't appear until a couple years from now. Next slide. 529, this qualified tuition programs. This is an awareness. You probably won't bump into that, but we will talk about this later in our sessions. Next slide. Charitable contributions, you probably read about this. It doesn't happen until tax year 2026. You can take what is called a charitable contribution, and you don't have to be an itemizer. We saw this a few years ago. It's coming back again in tax year 2026. Next year, or next slide. More of that charitable contribution. And here's just a quick pointer before we leave the slide. Charitable contributions, a lot of people make them, and we're going to talk about in our sessions making a contribution to a qualified charitable organization, and then also a qualified charitable distribution. We will talk about that. Next slide. This is only for your military folks. If you have someone who's qualified on the military module, that means you can help out active duty and reserve component folks. There was a change here, but again, for 2026. Next slide. The energy credits, you may be familiar with the various energy credits. big changes. And so we're going to talk about some of this stuff. And you can see right here on the slide, some of these credits ended in 2025. And so that's not a good thing for people who wanted to take these credits. You know, they were buying items or buying a vehicle and they wanted to take the credit. Next slide. Some of these credits don't take effect until tax year 2026. Next slide. This really gets in the weed here. Again, this is for most of the stuff it doesn't apply or future tax years. Next slide. This is really important. You have taxpayers who receive income, and at the VITA site, they may have a document, an information return that evidences income. That's great. And a lot of times they don't, which means we're still going to talk to them. And if we're able to prepare a return, we're still going to prepare a return. But the 1099-K is an information return. And this is something that is affecting individuals. Let's say typically they're selling things on, I'll probably date myself now. I don't even know if PayPal is still around, but maybe they're selling items on PayPal. And if they reach that threshold, then a 1099-K is issued to them. And then when someone has income and they're eligible for VITA tax preparation, we'll find a place on that tax return to put that income. And then keep in mind, we have three types of taxpayers. We have wage earners, we have self-employed taxpayers, and we have investors. And you can't be anything else. And so sometimes our taxpayers are all three, or sometimes they're just one, maybe self-employed or maybe a wage earner. Next slide. 1099, this is going to be effective next tax year. You're going to see this in the VITA program where people are going to say, yeah, I worked for this company. I made $800 as a independent contractor. No requirement to issue a 1099 to them for next tax year. But keep in mind, even though there's probably no requirement, if they had income, they still got to report it on their return. So they will not have a information return to evidence the income. Next slide. Social Security number. If someone doesn't have a Social Security number, sometimes they're not eligible for certain credits. And this is really important. We'll kind of slow down here. In the VITA program, we help out undocumented individuals to the best of our abilities. And what that means is they will come in usually with what is called an ITIN, which is an individual taxpayer identification number. And if that's the case, we can help them out. We can file a return for them. So you will see a lot of undocumented folks. And so we don't turn them away. I know there's been a lot of stuff in the news recently, but we're going to help them as best we can. But sometimes they have to have a Social Security number for certain types of credits on the return. Next slide. Okay, I think this is a great place to kind of pause for a break. But Robert, you said there's some questions.
There are some questions. Let me go over them. So the first question was asking about being able to see the recordings on the YouTube channels. They're going to be available on both the United Way and the St. Killian YouTube channels, I believe. The next question asks about what they should do with people that are out of scope, and we've discussed it. You'll have to send them elsewhere.
Yeah. And out of scope, again, you can commiserate with them. You can show them away. What I do in my VITA site, I explain to them that it's out of scope, and I usually refer them to the California Society of Tax Consultants. I'm not referring them to a specific preparer. I just say go to this website, show them the website. They can put in their zip code, and then a laundry list of preparers will pop up, and then they can pick one.
All right. The next question is the Link and Learn fully self-learning? And that is yes, it is totally self-paced at your pace.
It is. And I'm going to use the term user-friendly. It is user-friendly, but once it's posted by the IRS, you're able to go there, you're able to review information, and then you can take the exam after you review the information. And again, very important, when you're taking your Link and Learn certifications, please use your publication 4012 to look up your answers. And that way you take it one time and you're done. Because if you're unsuccessful, then it means you have to take it again. And I don't know about you, I don't like taking tests more than once.
The next question asks about disabled individuals. Are they still confined to the $67,000 income or not?
Well, that 67,000, that's written in Jello. And so if you have someone who has a mental or physical disability, what we want to do, because they're obviously included in that population. We have special populations that we focus on. But yeah, that if someone's making $150,000 and they're a wage earner and they're disabled, they're outside of the scope.
Okay. The next question asks, how do I know what site I'm going to be working at?
Oh, that's probably one of those easy questions. You can work at whatever site you want. Michelle at United Way, she has a whole crew that can help you. I'll just speak and then I'll bounce it to Michelle. Wherever you want to work, you can contact United Way and say, "Hey, I live in Irvine. I want to work at a site in Irvine," and then Michelle can help you out. Michelle?
Thank you, Jerry, and thank you for that question. We should be finalizing all the sites in December, and there will be, once you send in your 13615, your certification, we will be giving you access to the volunteer portal. If you would like to go directly to a coalition partner, you're more than welcome, and we can provide that information as well.
Excellent. The next question asks if is there going to be attendance recorded for these training sessions?
And Robert, I think I can answer that question. For those that registered through the Orange County United Way link, we do have your information on the registration.
The next question talks about Schedule E, and it asks, can we only file Schedule E tax returns for military only, or does it include filing for anyone with Schedule E if we get military certified?
Yeah, the,
And I
the
can,
the language that I've read is if you are trained on the military module, that means you can prepare Schedule E rental property for folks who are associated with the military. And keep in mind on that Schedule E, we do not, in the VITA program, we do not calculate depreciation. And that's usually a sticking point, which means when we tell the taxpayer, when you come to the site, you have to have that depreciation amount calculated. And that's non-negotiable. Can I calculate depreciation? Depreciation? Yes, of course I can, but we don't do that in the VITA site.
all right. And will the deduction for overtime and the various amounts, will these automatically be computed in TaxSlayer?
Yes, yes. We are going to show you in the tax year 2025 practice lab the tab that you go to enter the data. And then what happens is when you prepare a PDF file, that schedule that we talked about automatically generates.
And then the deduction on overtime and tips, is that just federal or is that also California?
Oh, you know something? I'm gonna plead ignorance. I'm not going to tell you something I don't know. I expect that California is going to conform. I haven't seen any language yet, but I expect conformity. But I guess the short answer is that is a work in progress.
And then the no tax on car loan interest, is that only if you buy a new car this year, or what if you're in your fourth year of the loan?
That would be a vehicle that you acquired in tax year 2025. That's my understanding.
Okay. Let me see what else we got. It asks, what should we do if the police try to enter the facility uh, when we're doing someone's taxes with an ITIN number? If the
You
ICE
know
or
that
somebody
that's yeah, there's language out there in the literature. I think that the bottom line is when you're at your site, whatever side it is, you have responsibility for the safety of everybody there. And so when someone comes to the site, if they have a reason for being at the site, you're going to tell them, this is a tax site. But if they have a reason for being there, and I'm not a cop. I don't know all the rules about being a cop, but if a cop shows up and the cop has business being there, and and they got a search warrant, well, guess what? They're coming in. But I would think that you would probably bounce that up to the director of the college, the director, the business manager of the church, the director of the community center, and there are protocols or battle drills in place to have that conversation with law enforcement when they knock on the door.
All right.
And then here's another thing, just quick aside, we don't share data with anybody. So let's say for some strange reason, the immigrations and custom enforcement people show up, the ICE people show up. We don't share returns with them. We don't share birth dates with them. We don't share tax information with them. We don't share that. That's confidential information that we keep under wraps, if you will. But again, if somebody came to my site and they were federal or local law enforcement, I would say, hey, I'm gonna call the senior person at this facility, and they can make the decision. If I'm the senior person, I would say, we really don't need you here right now. This is a tax site, and if the person says, well, I have a legal reason for being here, well, then I guess I'm going to have that discussion. But at the end of the day, I'm going to protect the people at my site. I don't want law enforcement to, rummaging through people's belongings or paperwork. Maybe they want to talk to someone outside, but again, at the end of the day, I'm going to protect people at my site.
All right. Is it within scope to do a return for someone whose spouse died in 2025?
Yes, it is. And unfortunately, you're going to see that a lot. So that is what is called a return prepared for a decedent. And what we would ask for the death certificate. And then what happens is the surviving spouse would sign for the individual who's passed. And for tax year 2025, if they've passed in 2025, then usually the surviving spouse will sign as married filing joint and they'll sign for the decedent.
Okay. And do you know when the Lincoln Learn is going to be up and running?
I don't. All I can tell you in years past, in the last, I think 20 years, it usually came online anywhere between the 5th of November and about the 15th of November. So it should be pretty quick here. I mean, we're coming up on the season, but it should be pretty quick.
All right, last question for this for now. Does the test have to be completed in a certain time frame or is it unlimited?
You have unlimited time. So literally, let's say you're in the basic certification and you're like Jeremy, or you look out the window and you see that cute little bird chirping away, and then you just stop taking the test. It logs you out or you log out, come back the next day, and it'll bring you back to where you left off.
All right, sounds good. Barry, one quick question. The W-2s, will it have the overtime itemized in a separate box this year, or how's that going to work?
Short answer is I don't know because I haven't seen it. I would imagine there's some type of document. It could be the W-2, but I've yet to see anything on that.
Okay.
Okay, so what we're going to do, we're going to kind of pivot from our PowerPoint because we are running short on time, but I want to give everybody an opportunity to have an awareness and practice with this practice lab. So what you have in front of you, this is the tax year 2024 Lincoln Learn program. So if you went to the internet and typed in link and learn from the IRS website, you're going to get this landing page right here. This tab up here that says certification paths, 2025 is not loaded, so you're not able to certify in 2025, but you can investigate that if you want to. But let's take a look at the tax software practice lab. And down here under additional resources, we're going to click here. And then we're going to go ahead and type in Train Pro Web. And Train Pro Web is all one word, all uppercase. And then it brings you to this particular screen that says sign in or create an account. And so if you are a returning volunteer, you probably remember your password from last year. If you're brand new, you'd create an account. You'd hit that blue button. And it gives you this particular screen. I'll make that a little bit larger. And so what you would do, you would type in some type of email address here. And then you got your email address, work, school, or personal. And then you confirm that. You type in your username, whichever name you want to use. And if it's acceptable, then you move on to password. You type in your password. And you can see here, it has to be a certain number of characters. And if someone else has selected your username, then you'll be told, try again. And you come down to program type, and you would type in VITA, VITA, Volunteer Income Tax Assistance Program. And then you can ignore site identification number. If you know it, great. But if you don't, you can ignore that and move on to password recovery. And if you're like me, I've only lost my password probably 1,000 times before. So you want a recovery. So your security question, you got a laundry list, pet's name, father or mother's middle name, something like that. And then once you select your question, then you'd enter your security answer, and then you'd be able to create an account. So it's that simple to actually use the software. Okay, so I've already created an account. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to go back to sign in, and I'm going to sign in. So give me just a moment here. Good. Okay, very good. Okay, so here's the practice lab. Very busy. And so if you're going to spend time, you probably want to spend time in section 4, where it says preparing a return. You've got tutorials. And section 6, where you have practice return and check figures. And to use the practice lab, you go to that big blue and white colored button, and you go to your practice area. And if you're new to this particular program, you cannot file a return with the practice lab. So you cannot goof up. If you goof up, you're goofing up in the practice lab. You're not sending a return to the IRS. This is not the live software, if you will. So let's go ahead and give you a quick intro so you can utilize this in the upcoming week, and you can work on one of the very basic returns. So let's go to start a new return. Now you can see right here, it says 2025 tax return. This is the 2025 tax program for tax year 2025. If you go into the upper right-hand corner, you can see a little toggle, and you can toggle between 24 and 25. So let's do this. Let's go ahead and pick 2025. This is the new software. I would call this a work in progress. I know in years past, the software is not perfected the first time they launch it. And so there may be some issues with it. But again, it's a practice lab. So let's go ahead and start a new return. We're going to enter a Social Security number. So let me throw one in. And this probably looks very similar to the tax year 2024 software that you utilized. And look at that, I've already selected a number. So if that's the case, let's go ahead and select another number and get into our software. Okay, it starts with filing status, and we're going to get into this in great detail next time we meet. But filing status is important. You're going to find this in the publication 4012. Probably the more challenging one would be head of household, which we'll talk about in great detail. But let's start off with a real basic return, single, which means their marital status on December 31st, 2025. And if they're single, that means they're going to file as a single individual. And then anytime you hit that continue button, what you're doing, you're saving the data. So let's go ahead and put in a taxpayer's name. So we got Lisa. You can see that the SSN is masked. This is a little bit different from last year. You're going to have to ask about the date of birth. That'll appear on that intake and interview sheet. And we're going to make her about 30 years of age. It's going to ask for an occupation, and we'll put down she's a teller. There's a lot of tabs in the software that you're not going to use. We will talk about a lot of these, but not all of them. And so in this particular case, we're not going to enter any data. We're going to put in an address. And this particular taxpayer is based in Orange County. And then to get past the screen, you have to have a telephone number. Throw in a phone number, and then we're done, and we hit continue. Ask about dependents. We're going to talk about dependents in great detail, but again, not right now. We've got a single taxpayer with no dependents, which means no qualifying children, no qualifying relatives. So we're going to put no, and we're going to move on. And then this is going to be your go-to slide. It starts with income. And most of our taxpayers are going to be wage earners, or maybe they're going to be Schedule C. So let's do a real basic return. The Schedule C is in Charlie. I stand corrected. The W-2, and this is the wage and tax statement. And so we've got a standard W-2. That's typically what you see. And the mantra in our program is we're going to enter data as we see it on the document. So they're going to give you typically a hard copy, a piece of paper, which will be a W-2, and then we'll enter data. So let's say we've got a W-2 here. We'll throw in, this is the employer identification number, and every employer is going to have that, and it'll be reflected on the W-2. So it comes up with the name of an organization, and so we've got the employer on the left-hand side, employee data on the right-hand side. And then we're going to come down here to wages and tips and other compensation. Let's say she grosses $50,000. Now, before I hit enter, watch box 3, 4, 5, and 6. And we have auto population, and that's based on what is called the FICA rate, which is 6.2%, and the Medicare rate, which is 1.45%. And so you can see right here, 1, 3, and 5 are all the same. And if that is what appears on the W-2, then we're in business, all is well. And then we're going to also enter federal income tax withheld. And let's say she had a total of $5,000 withheld. And so that would take care of the federal side of the house. And again, we're not going to talk about each and every one of these boxes, but we'll talk about a number of them right now. Box 12A. Box 12A has a couple of codes in it that we're going to use again and again in the VITA program. And the first code is going to be D as in Delta. That's deferred compensation. And that would be like a 401k. Or Delta Delta, that would be insurance, health insurance paid by the employer on behalf of the employee. So let's put that down. And so let's say the employer pays health insurance for the employee to the tune of $7,000. Box 13, again, the mantra is we're going to key it as we see it. Let's say there's a retirement plan that she's in by her employer. We're going to go to box 14. Box 14 talks about occupational plans, and not every state has one, but California does. Not everybody, but a lot of people pay into the state disability insurance program, which is California SDI. So what happens is if you pay into it, that means your employer will go ahead and take that out of your pay. The employer remits it to the state of California, and if you become sick or disabled and you qualify, you can draw a state disability check. So in this case, premiums are $200. And you can see it says carried to the federal Schedule A. And the reason that that is because the Schedule A has state and local taxes. And this is a tax. This is a tax that's paid. Then we go to the state information. Key it as we see it. We only do California. And then over here, the employer state ID number, this is issued by the California EDD, and it's different than the federal EIN. And so we would key it as we see it on the W-2, and we would only key in numbers there. Down here, box 16 usually is going to be the same as box 1, federal wages. And this is a conformity issue. So this is what you're typically going to see. And then box 17 is state income tax withheld. And let's say she had a total of $2,000 withheld from her pay by the employer remitted to the state of California. And then box 18, 19, and 20, that's for any type of local jurisdiction that has individual income tax. There are none in California. The one that I can think off the top of my head is the city of New York has an individual income tax. And so you would, if you're working and living in New York and helping out a taxpayer there, you would utilize 18, 19, and 20 for the city of New York income tax. Okay, so that's that. You hit enter. Here's our dashboard. And if you had another W-2, you'd go to the upper left-hand corner and you'd click where it says add a W-2, another W-2. And then if you're like me, I make plenty of mistakes. And if you make plenty of mistakes, you got a couple of choices. You can go to this blue in color pencil and you can click there and that brings you back to all your entries and you can make your changes. Whatever changes you need to make, if you need to make one. So let's say tax withheld, I put in 5,000, but it was only 4,000. I misread it. Hit continue. And then if you've garbled an entry so bad you just want it to go away, you'd hit that red in color garbage can. And then in that case, the entire W-2 entry that I made would go away. Okay, hit continue. And there are a lot of boxes. And in the VITA program, you're going to use some of these boxes, but certainly not all of them. Okay, we have that. I'll show you a couple other things before we wrap up this particular return. Over on the left-hand side, you see an item that says deductions, same thing in the middle. So we'll go to our deductions, and let's say we got this particular student or this particular taxpayer, let's say she's entitled to some type of credit. You'd click there, and let's say she's entitled to one of the education credits, which we talk about in great detail. This is where you find one of the education credits. Okay, so let's go ahead and hit continue. And we're going to go to our insurance. Like I say, there's a lot of tabs here. But we'll get into not all of them, but a lot of these tabs in later sessions. So let's go down to health insurance right here. On every return, we're going to talk about health insurance. And if you're not familiar with the Affordable Care Act, this passed back in 2010, and it set up what is called the federal exchange. And so most states have the federal exchange. The legislation also allowed states to have their own program. California has their own program called Covered California. And so if you are in Covered California, you'd be issued a 1095A as an alpha. And this has information about the premiums that you paid and the subsidies that you received from the taxpayers. And if you're not in the Affordable Care Act, which this particular taxpayer is not because her insurance is paid for by her employer, you would indicate no, and you would simply hit continue and cursor through the rest of the material. Again, it's a work in progress. California is not available, so we're going to hit continue, and we're going to show you the return. And let's see. And then Michelle, if you can let me know if you can see the 1040.
Yes, we can.
Okay. And so here's your 1040. So that's how quick it is. You will actually get this good at the VITA site. You will be preparing returns in a matter of minutes, some of the real basic ones. So our administrative data is at the very top. There's some changes. This looks different than obviously the 2024. But again, our administrative data is at the top. We've indicated she is single, so that's her filing status. And we will talk about filing statuses in great detail probably in a later Zoom session. And then you can see right here, digital assets. We will help taxpayers who have purchased digital assets, cryptocurrency, but if they sell it, that's outside the scope. When we have a dependent, we will have a tax return with dependents. This is where these are where the dependents are listed. And this looks a little bit different. We'll talk about disabilities, we'll talk about full-time students, but you can see this is different from last year. Well, let's get a kind of a flavor for the return. And so we can see income in box 1 alpha that shows that $50,000 in wages that she earns. It carries down to line 1Z as in Zulu. And she's got nothing on these other lines, so it bounces all the way down to line 9. This is her total income. And then you may have heard the term adjusted gross income from time to time. When you hear that term, adjusted gross income, AGI, it simply means total income less any adjustments to income. She has no adjustments, so her total income of 50K equals her AGI of 50K. And then what happens is, well, we're going to go to the next screen. And we're just going to go to page 2 and page 1 of the 1040. This is page 1. And when you're looking at page 1 of the 1040, you can see line 11B. And it says this is the amount from the previous line. Okay. And then we have what is called a deduction. And the deduction in her case, we have no information regarding an itemized deduction. So she takes the standard deduction. And you can see, and I'm not an English person, I think this is a preposition, but anyway, the word or, you get either the standard deduction or itemized deduction. So what that means is you're subtracting an amount, a deduction, from this AGI. And so if you do that, she ends up with 35,000, and this is her taxable income. And that's what you're going to see. About maybe 10% of our VITA returns are Schedule A's, and that's itemized deductions. So you don't get both, you get one or the other. And then this is important. Taxable income is $35,000. Your software is going to look at this taxable income and the filing status and also the age of the taxpayer. And then you can see that the tax, this is individual income tax of $3,965. And this is what she is responsible for paying. So we bounce all the way down here. There's no non-refundable credits. And so we go to line 24. This is total tax liability. So she either will or has paid that tax. And so let's see what we have here on the rest of the return. She has payments that she's made through withholding of $4,000. So that's not bad. She's pretty close. She's $35 off, which means she owed $39.65. She has withholding of $4,000. The delta or the difference is $35. That's her overpayment, and that's going to be her refund. And so that's how you do it. That's a basic return, if you will. And then, of course, we'll also talk about in the various sessions we conduct, we'll talk about direct deposit. This is something that you're going to see with the vast majority of your VITA clients. They want direct deposit. And the ones who don't want it, I explain to them, hey, you can do whatever you want. It's a free country. But if you don't have direct deposit and you're waiting for that paper check, you're not going to be waiting days. You might not even be waiting weeks. You may be waiting months. And so I always encourage clients to get an account and to have direct deposit. And if you owe money, then a direct debit. That's usually the safe way to do it. And you can do that both on the federal and on the state return. And so that is the 1040, and that is the basics. Those are the basics, I should say. Okay. And Michelle, we got a few more minutes. We can take questions right now or bounce back to that PowerPoint.
Sure. Robert, do you want to take the 3 questions that we have, or should we bounce back to the PowerPoint?
Let's take the questions because I'm thinking we can probably get a lot out of that.
All right. First question says, I wasn't sure, but I thought I might have seen something about the educator credit. Has that changed for any tax year 2025?
No, the information regarding the educator credit, that's going to be in a future tax year, not tax year 2025. Right now, the educator credit, you can take a deduction if you're a K through 12 instructor, you have 900 hours of instruction, and you're pulling money out of your pocket to pay for usually supplies for the kids. But we will talk about that in a later session.
And then is there no tax on Social Security income?
Here's your answer for Social Security. Social Security, the most tax you're going to pay is, let me restate that. For some individuals who make a little bit more money than others, their Social Security benefits may be taxed in part. In part. Generally, in the VITA program, the vast majority of your VITA clients are not going to pay any individual income tax on Social Security benefits.
If an IRA required minimum distribution exceeds $67,000, are they out of scope?
Let's see. I guess the answer is it depends. If you had a required minimum distribution of $70,000, I'd handle it at my VITA site. If you had a required minimum distribution of $150,000, I would say that is definitely outside of the scope because of the income limitation.
And then we already answered that question. Will there be paper checks sent out from the IRS this year?
To my knowledge, yes, and I highly discourage paper checks. If you know anything about paper checks, I've had client after client, both VITA client and paying clients, say, "Hey Jerry, I haven't received my refund. It's been 6 months." I'm thinking, "Did you get direct deposit?" "No, I got a paper check." I said, "Well, you can go ahead and fight the IRS, or if you're one of my paying clients, I fight on your behalf." But it's usually time consuming and frustrating. And my response is just don't do it. Do direct
All right.
deposit.
That's all the questions we have.
Okay, great. Michelle, I'm going to go ahead and discontinue that. And if you can load up that PowerPoint, we got a couple minutes. I just make a quick point and then we can wrap it up.
Sure, one moment.
Just an announcement for the St. Killian volunteers. We do have the 4012s and the 6744s available at the office at the church. Come by and pick them up.
And then I'll chat on a couple topics. And so if some of the stuff seems to be maybe too fast and maybe too much, keep in mind there's a lot of resources available. And what's going to happen is you're going to get very comfortable after you prepare just a couple of returns. And you are surrounded at the VITA site by people who have done this before, who are willing to provide information to you and help you out. So if you're new or newer to the VITA program, uh, there are people that will help, and no doubt about it. So we just have a couple minutes, so we talk about, and we'll really get into this next week. But for filing basics, keep in mind when people come to the VITA site, they generally will have a filing requirement or they want to get their refund. And so that's usually what you're going to see. And when you're talking about filing statuses, there's different types. Usually, this is something that you're able to determine very quickly because there's a decision tree in the publication 4012. So you're going to ask a few questions. You're going to look at that intake and interview sheet. And usually the issue that you'll have is maybe head of household filing status. Head of household filing status, you're going to read about this. It's either an individual who's unmarried or for tax purposes, they're considered unmarried. And we'll talk about that in great detail in the next session. But that usually is the issue. Of course, they have to pay for more than half the household upkeep, and they usually have minor children. So that's one that you're going to not struggle with. But that's probably the one that you maybe have a little bit of difficulty. But most of these are pretty basic. Single, again, your marital status at the end of the year. filing jointly. This is an election. You choose to do it. No one can make you file a joint return, not your spouse, not a federal judge, not the IRS. It's your choice. That's why they call it an election. If you don't want to file married filing joint, we don't do married filing separate in the VITA program in California. Non-negotiable, just tell the client, sorry, we don't do that. You'll have to go out in town and find a preparer. Qualifying surviving spouse, we had a question on that. If someone passes away in 2025, that surviving spouse, they can sign for their decedent spouse. Qualifying spouse, you're going to read about this in the 4012. This is someone who's lost their spouse, and in the next 2 tax years, they can take this filing status. Of course, they have to have a dependent. So you're going to see that from time to time. And then we'll talk about all these other things when we meet next week. But again, you want to keep in mind most people, they want to file a return or they have a filing requirement. And then other people that have to file a return is if they've got an early withdrawal penalty from a 401k, that's a tax deferred savings program, or if they're self-employed and they have net income of $400 or more, or if they've been enrolled in Covered California, they're going to come to the VITA site with that form 1095A as an alpha, and you're going to prepare a return for them. And they have to file a return if they're in Covered California. And then we'll talk about all these other things. There's things like an amended return. That's kind of like an advanced topic. We'll talk about that in one of our sessions. All right, how about the next slide? Affordable Care Act, we've already mentioned this. Keep in mind the Affordable Care Act, individuals are paying premiums for health insurance and they are being subsidized by the taxpayers. And so if that's the case, they're going to come to the site with a 1095 alpha. They are going to sometimes be eligible for an additional subsidy. And that's that net premium tax credit that you're going to see on the Schedule 3. And we'll talk about this in great detail. Sometimes you have a taxpayer who's received too much of a subsidy. And if that's the case, and this is not a good thing for the taxpayer, this is a long term, they're going to have what is called the excess advance premium tax credit repayment. And that means they're going to owe. And so we'll talk about that when we get into the Affordable Care Act for your taxpayer. And that appears on the Schedule 2. Okay, how about the next slide? Dependents. We're going to talk about dependents in great detail, but this is where you're going to find the rules for dependents. And there's 2 types of dependents. You have a qualifying child, and then you have qualifying relatives. And we're going to get into that publication 4012, how you determine if someone has a qualified dependent. And if they have a qualifying dependent, credits are associated with that dependency. Next slide. Income, keep in mind, again, you're going to see this again and again at the VITA site. Not every time, but you'll see it. People will have an item of income and you'll look at it and you'll scratch your head. Your site coordinator will look at it. They'll scratch their head and you're asking for information returns. And sometimes you got to do the deep dive if it's in scope for that particular item. For example, settlements. You have these lawsuits where there's a class action settlement and they give you a little postcard and say, hey, is this taxable? So you ask them a few questions and then you determine, yes, it is taxable because it's considered back wages, for example, and then that would go on the return as other income. But when you talk about information returns, there are many different types, and keep in mind, information returns generally substantiate income. Sometimes they will not substantiate all of the income. That's why that interview is so important. I've literally had clients sit across from me and say, hey, Jerry, I didn't get a W-2, so that means I don't report it, right? I said, well, no, you do report it. And the reason you report it is because the tax law says if you've got income, you're going to report it unless it's otherwise excluded. And W-2 wages are generally included in income. And that's why we're asking for these information returns. Typically, you're going to look at a W-2, certain types of 1099s. We're going to talk about all these at length. And then you might have someone who's self-employed who receives a 1099 NEC. But again, sometimes they evidence all or some of the income. For your retirees are going to get the 1099-R and the SSA 1099. And again, there's a lot of information, but we're going to go through this in great detail. And Michelle, if you would, since we're about out of time, can you bounce to our last slide?